I am wearing my Care Bears shirt to talk to you about how Iboga works with the inner child. I hope that's appreciated. So, how does Iboga work with the inner child? Firstly, what the way that this is explained, or that I'll explain it, is a very westernized psychology type of explanation of how Iboga is helping us heal in the perspective from the perspective of the inner children. And there are traditions that have been working with this medicine for much longer that would also explain it in a number of different ways and pathways, and both are very, very beautiful lenses to help us kind of comprehend and narrativize our relationship with this master plant, as we're really just in such the early days of understanding its depth of impact and ways that it's working within us. But from the perspective of the inner children, um, to kind of go back and understand, in early childhood, we come into this world and really we're pure divine essence. We are expressions of the divine. And then we come into this world, and then we soon find out that um, it can be quite challenging. It might not be so safe. It's kind of full of suffering, all sorts of difficult things. And so, in order to move through this, we need to develop an interface that will help us figure out how to move and navigate through the world. And this interface eventually becomes our personality. Various numerous structures, or a whole kind of collection or gathering of them that were mostly the strongest ones, the strongest held ones are mostly developed when we're young in our developmental years, that become crystallized into who we are now, or who we experience ourselves to be now in the present. The ones that were most crystallized are typically in responses to really big emotions like anger and shame, fear, experiences of being overwhelmingly alone, any big emotions that just became too overwhelming at that time, and were unable to be fully processed. So that leads to some of us becoming really helpful, some of us becoming really well behaved, some becoming dominant and forceful, some becoming quiet and reserved and withdrawn, or some becoming rebellious. So you see a whole range of personality traits, and won't get into this now, but it's not just our childhood. It also is deeply influenced by our ancestors and our past lives, but it's a different time. So when working with Iboga, it helps us to become more aware of these inner children and all of the responses and what makes up their patterning. Where did it come from? Where did it get first laid down? How do they kind of become activated? What happens when they get activated? And then, really, the nugget inside all of it is, what do they actually need? And we'll kind of get to that. So, what is actually happening in the brain as it relates to this concept and understanding of the inner children and how Iboga works with them? So, our brain is typically filtering in a ton of information to keep us functioning. And this is primarily done by the default mode network, which has to do with our identity, or sense of self, our own like self narrative. It is our adult identity, which also includes all of these coping strategies, or perhaps we would call them managers or firefighter parts. And then also the prefrontal cortex, that has to do with control, suppression, and inhibition. And traumatic memories, these overwhelming experiences, are typically suppressed because they were too destabilizing when they happened. And so when we're working with Iboga, what happens is that it helps to decrease the rigidity of this default mode network. And then it helps to reduce also the top-down control, which means that it's helping to loosen our rigid sense of like habitual identity narration. And this means then that the memories that have been walled off may no longer be so suppressed, aka the inner child parts are now actually, the hurt inner child parts are now able to surface without being suppressed. Um, So that's the default mode network and the prefrontal cortex. The hippocampus is what is our memory integrator. It basically helps to contextualize memory. Its main function is like time stamping the memory to help us know this is something that's happened in the past and this is something that's happened in the present. What happens in stressful and traumatic times is that cortisol floods the hippocampus and then it prevents the hippocampus from being able to do its job. And so now memories that would have been stamped, this is over, we're filing in the past, almost is floating in this in between limbo state. They become fragmented. Now they're just almost existing in this sensory file with no start and end, or they just become totally inaccessible. And so now there's no stamp on them that is telling us this is done and over. And this is why in conditions like PTSD or complex PTSD, you have this experience where there's a sensation that happens. It triggers what would have been understood as a past emotional file, but because it hasn't been stamped that way, it sets off the body's current reactionary sequence as if it is happening now in order to respond to it as if it's happening now, even though it's not. So Iboga helps to restore this hippocampal communication, which means that now it's allowing the memory to be recontextualized and reconnected to the context that it was in. As in, it can now say this fear is not about now, it's about then, and that's old, and that's no longer happening. So this is why with Iboga, it helps memories to come back with this sense of clarity and detail instead of it being experienced as like a this is happening now danger. And this is that experience where now they can be witnessed neutrally. And in addition to that, the amygdala, which is usually the part of the brain that's all associated with fear and danger, because our wounded inner child memories are typically blocked by these big emotions like fear and danger and shame and fear of abandonment and aloneness, the amygdala would usually be blocking access to these, or maybe it would instead trigger big emotional flooding. Iboga also is seen to help decrease the loudness of the amygdala, the dominance in which it holds. And then that also means that now the memory is able to come back without putting the body in its full sequence of fight and flight. So now you have access to it. You're also able to feel it more, which has to do with the insula, which is the primary interoceptive hub, meaning it's all about the internal sensing of the body, the breath, the heartbeat, emotions, tension, hunger, temperature, all the things that are inside of the body. And Iboga is seen to increase the insula sensitivity and increase the incoming signals inside the body, which now means that the once blocked emotions and sensations are now available. But also, if they were not being felt, it's now being amplified so that we can feel them, which is now, in order to heal it, you must feel it. You have to feel it to heal it, type of thing. It's also been seen to slow down neural firing, which then allows us to increase these periods of reaction, to give us the space to observe and to feel it before any of that typical reaction would happen. So this is essentially how we welcome back all the inner children by creating, the narrativized therapeutic storytelling of this is we're able to welcome back these inner children that have been blocked, repressed, put away by the amygdala. We're able to create a safe space for them to return. We're able to, in that space, now have the internal regulation because it's getting properly contextualized with the adult self and the younger selves to meet without dysregulation. We're allowing them to be properly updated to understand that the past is now and that they're in a different place. we register these new sensations of safety, of love, of understanding, compassion, forgiveness, uh, the proper sequences that needed to take place at that time is now able to take place. These memories and sensations and feelings are now in process of being integrated, aka we're in this process of reparenting. Within that entire process, and the gift of it all is that we are gaining very deep wisdom about what it was that they actually needed, and now we are learning by way of actual embodiment and doing what it was that they needed. And that births within us a much deeper and different vibration of consciousness within ourselves that turn into new capacities and gifts, major upgrade. And we come out with a totally different nervous system, a totally different sense of ourselves and our body, a totally different set of beliefs and sense of identity and self. Again, all this upgraded version to be now the self that is able to be trusted to run the show, as opposed to the hurt and wounded inner children.